So Jesus hid the truth from people so they could not believe him. What do we do with that? Welcome back. We are going to Mark chapter 4 today in our hashtag Why I Am Not a Calvinist playlist. And we're going to look at this time when Jesus told his disciples that the reason that I tell parables is because I don't want some people to actually believe and understand right now. So this can be a little bit confusing, but what's happening here is Jesus is explaining why he speaks in parables all the time. And I just want to read these to you. Let's actually go directly to it here. Mark chapter 4, verse 10. But when he was alone, those around him with the 12 asked him about the parable. And he said, to you it has been given to know the mystery of the kingdom of God, but to those who are outside, all things come in parables, so that seeing they may see and not perceive, and hearing they may hear and not understand, lest they should turn and their sins should be forgiven them. So what do we do with that? Now, the context here is that Jesus has just gone through the parable of the four seeds, where he talks about how a sower goes out and spreads seeds around, and some lands on good ground, some on rocks, some among the thorns, and some are good ground. And he explains this, which really isn't that hard of one to get, except for maybe some of the details about it. But then his disciples and others gather around him and they say, you have to explain this to us. I mean, what's going on with this? And matter of fact, if we just skip to verse 13 quick, I like this. He said to them, do you not understand this parable? It's like, this is one of the easiest ones I've ever given you. How can you actually not get this? This is actually pretty simple. But he describes here why he actually used parables, and he uses them a lot. He would tell stories about things that people knew, and he was teaching a deeper lesson. When I was a kid, they used to say that a parable is an earthly story with a heavenly meaning. Maybe you've heard that before. But it's something that the people really could relate to. A lot of times in the Bible, in the New Testament, it was agricultural because they lived in a very agricultural community. So they would understand this whole idea of, sowing and shepherding and things like that. And Jesus used these stories to explain deeper things to some people, but also to hide the truth from other people. So what are we supposed to do with that? So he clearly says here that there's two reasons that he spoke in parables, this one and the others. One is so that they could understand, his followers, so they could understand more clearly. And the other reason is so other people could not understand. So this obviously is a little bit of a hang up here. Why is Jesus making it so some people cannot understand? Is this a way to promote something like Calvinism where, God says, I want you to believe and I don't want you to believe, or not? I don't think it is, but we're going to talk about this and just understand what this passage is. But in order to understand it, we have to go to the book of Isaiah, because Jesus is quoting from Isaiah chapter 6. We're going to go straight over here. The first 8 verses, just this really cool vision. Isaiah gets transported into the throne room of God, and he gets kind of voluntold a little bit. Hey, I need a volunteer, and Isaiah's the only one standing there, and he's just seen the glory of God, so of course he's got a volunteer. But this is the message. God tells Isaiah, this is a message I want you to go back and bring to Judah. My people have turned away from me, and your job is to go and preach to them. And this is what he says, verse 9. And he said, go and tell this people, keep on hearing, but do not understand. Keep on seeing, but do not perceive. Now, can you imagine having a job like that? Your job is to go out there and tell people, look, I'm going to keep preaching to you, but don't believe me. Don't believe anything I say. You're not going to believe me. And that was Isaiah's job. Isaiah, you're going out there and you're going to preach. Nobody's going to listen to you, but just go and do it anyway. And tell them, just keep going in your own direction. You've decided that you don't want anything to do with God, so you just go your own way. And then he says this to Isaiah, when you're preaching, this is what you're going to do. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, and shut their eyes, lest they see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and return and be healed. So he's saying, Isaiah, your job is to go out there and you are to preach to these people. And as you preach to these people, it is going to make their hearts more dull and their ears heavy. Their eyes are going to be shut. The more that you preach to them, the less they're going to listen. So be encouraged, being uplifted here. You're not going to be able to do anything as you go out and do your job. You just do it, or just be obedient, but they're not going to listen. And the more you preach, the more they are simply not going to listen. Now, it's very interesting here. I want to just skip over to Acts real quick, because Paul actually He quoted Isaiah a different way. Acts chapter 28, verse 7. When he's quoting Isaiah, he's quoting Isaiah the same way, or a little bit differently. In verse 27, as he quotes, he says, "For the heart of this people have grown dull. Their ears are hard of hearing. Their eyes they have closed, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears, lest they should understand with their hearts, so that I should heal them." Notice that their hearts, I'm sorry, right there, their eyes they have closed. So when he's referring back to Isaiah, he's saying, look, these people, they haven't had somebody else blind their eyes. They have closed their eyes to the truth. He's talking about the people specifically of Judah, to whom Isaiah was going. These people have refused to obey God for years and years and years. God says, don't set up idols. And they went and they set up idols. And he says, their eyes have been closed. So now, Isaiah, you're supposed to go and preach to them. And you're supposed to tell them, just keep going in the wrong way. Just keep going in that way you decided to go. Okay. Isaiah, the more you preach to them, the more they are just not going to listen. Make their hearts dull. And he would make their hearts dull by them not, or by preaching to them. You know, sometimes maybe there's somebody that you have to constantly tell what to do. Like your children, maybe if you're a parent, you have kind of rebellious child and they don't want to listen to you. The more you tell them, the more it drives them away. And it's kind of a bit of advice. I use this. I was teaching this last night in our church. And one of the things, you know, sometimes people will come up to me and they'll have maybe a family member or a friend who's just rebellious and they don't want anything to do with God. And they say, how much should I push this? And my advice to them is, be careful about pushing it too hard, because you can just push some of these people right away too much. They don't want to listen. They know the truth. And if every time you're hounding them, it makes their heart harder. And that's what God tells Isaiah to do. Just keep pushing them, make their heart harder, because I am through with these people. I'm getting ready to punish them. So you just keep on preaching to them. And that is just going to keep making the heart harder, just leading them into their punishment. Now, I want to go back to Isaiah again, Isaiah chapter 6, because Isaiah has this question, okay? I'm supposed to go and I'm supposed to preach to these people who aren't going to listen to me. How long is this going to go on? Look here in verse 11 of Isaiah 6. Then I said, Lord, how long? How long do I have to do this? And he answered, until the cities are laid waste and without inhabitant, the houses are without a man, the land is utterly desolate. In other words, God is saying, Isaiah, you are going to go and you're going to preach to these people, and their hearts are going to continue to be hardened because they've already decided they were going to be hardened. Their hearts are continue to be hardened more through your preaching, and it's going to happen until I bring the punishment upon them, which, of course, we see that they were eventually destroyed by Babylon. And he says, you just keep preaching, and they're going to just keep turning away from me, and that's the point. I'm using your preaching to harden their hearts further in the direction that they were already decided they were going to go, and then I'm going to punish them. It's an interesting passage in Ezekiel where it has kind of the same thing. Ezekiel was in the same boat as Isaiah because he was supposed to preach to people who weren't going to listen either. It didn't come up. Ezekiel chapter 12. He says, now the word of the Lord came to me saying, son of man, you who dwell in the midst of a rebellious house, which has eyes to see but does not see, has ears to hear but does not hear, for they are a rebellious house. He's saying, you're going to go to a people that are in a rebellious house. They're not going to listen to me. Why? Because they're rebellious, not because I have chosen them not to listen to me. I mean, for goodness sakes, these were God's people. These are supposed to be the missionaries to the world. And they rebelled. And God said, because of that, their hearts will continue to be hardened as they hear the message that they're supposed to be repenting. It's not God deciding that they would not believe. It's they have decided themselves that they were not going to believe. And God continues to harden their heart, just like he did with Pharaoh. We looked at that recently. We see a similar thing happen here in Romans, the famous Romans chapter 1, verse 28. Romans 1, if you ever hear that the Bible doesn't talk about sexual sin, things like that, my goodness, you just got to read Romans chapter 1. But just picking up in the middle of the thought, it says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind. The King James says reprobate mind, to do those things which are not fitting. And he goes on to talk about all their sins. In other words, these are people who have seen that there is a God, or there is at least some greater person or being to whom they are responsible, and they still choose to go the wrong way. They don't like to have the idea of God in their mind, and God has just given them over to it. Okay, you go the way that you decided to go, and you see how that's going to work for you. These people in Romans 1 and that Ezekiel went and talked to, that Isaiah talked to, and the people that Jesus is talking to or about in Mark chapter 4, they're all people that have decided to do what's wrong. They decided to do what's wrong. There's a phrase called judicial hardening that's similar to this, which is the idea that God is going to blind an already rebellious person to keep going in the way that they're going, so he can accomplish a purpose, which generally is punishment, to show his glory in punishment. So now let's go back to Mark chapter 4. Now that we understand what he's talking about here, when he quotes Isaiah, we understand that when Jesus says that I'm speaking in parables so these people will not believe, he's not saying that I choose for these people not to be saved. That's not his point. He said these people have already decided they're going to go the wrong way, and I'm going to use that to accomplish a purpose here, because they have already decided they're going to go the wrong way. But the question is, why? Well, first of all, I want to point this out, because this is really one of the places that the whole issue of total depravity comes in. Can people actually believe without some previous regeneration happening in their heart? And the answer is, according to this passage, yes, it doesn't take a pre-work of regeneration, because Jesus did not want these people to understand him at this point. He did not want them to. Judah had already gone away. They'd already gone by the wayside. And he did not want them to recognize who he was as a Messiah at that particular point. And if they would have completely understood what he was teaching, they may have believed. And he didn't want them to at the moment, which shows a free will in this thing. He had to blind their eyes because they could have believed, and he did not want them to at the moment. That is so anti-Calvinistic right there. But the question is, why would he hide the truth? I mean, don't you think that he would want everybody to believe in him? I mean, he's coming, he's giving the message, he's going to die for people. Don't you think that he would want everybody to believe in him? Well, he didn't, and that's very clear. You can't get around that in this passage. But why? I'm going to give you three reasons, three possibilities. Each one of them could be true. Maybe all three of them are true. Maybe there's some others you thought of that I didn't think of. But I'm going to give three options why it could be that Jesus was blinding them from the truth at that moment. Okay, the first one is, so the cross could be accomplished. If all the people in Judah, we could call them the Israelites, we're specifically talking about Judah at this point, if they believed, if all the Jews believed in Jesus, they were never going to call for his crucifixion, because the Jews are the ones who called for the crucifixion. Many of them were jealous, the Pharisees and all of them. They were religious, and they were calling for a crucifixion of Jesus. And the Romans went along with it. The Romans actually did the crucifixion. What if these Jews would have just believed in Jesus? Then he wouldn't have gone to the cross. They wouldn't have called for it. So at that time, Jesus says, no, you need to be in unbelief. So because this is the way that God is working through the free will of man to accomplish the cross. They decided to rebel. God used that and hid the truth from them for the time being, so they couldn't believe. That's the first option, first reason why he may have blinded them, so the cross would be accomplished. Second is so the Gentiles would be included also in salvation. In Romans, I think it's chapter 11, it talks about how that the Jews have been blinded until the time of the Gentiles is finished. So in the day of Jesus, and even till today, the Jews are blinded to a certain degree. Many of them have been saved, and we need to support missionaries that go to the Jews, but their wholesale general rejection of Jesus and who he was led to the opening of the gospel to the Gentiles. Now, Gentiles could always be saved. It's always been about faith, but through Peter, with the whole vision of the sheet coming down and unclean food being on it and all that, and him going to Cornelius, and then through Paul, who was primarily the missionary to the Gentiles, God really opened it wide. He opened the gospel and salvation wide to the Gentiles and overtly invited all of us to come in. And so if the Jews would have believed, that may not have happened. So That's another reason. And then this is another reason I got this from Douglas Moo's commentary, the NIVAC. He says his opinion, which is kind of neat. He says Jesus telling things in parables to kind of hide the truth. It kept the merely curious out. It kept just the curious people out. I just want to read this quote from his commentary. His enigmatic teaching served to separate those who were curious from those who were serious, those who were seeking only a religious sideshow from those who were truly seeking after God. So when people would they want to follow Jesus, they kind of get the food and everything, they would follow him. And then he would talk in parables, and it's almost like they would say, this isn't so easy. I'm here for the food, but I've got to think, I've got to see past all this. Nah, no thanks, and then walk away. These are people who didn't really have it to begin with. They weren't really interested. But the people who really were interested, like the disciples, for example, they would come around, they'd say, tell us what this means. We want to know more. They would stay with Jesus. They weren't just curious and just wanting the food and, the good time. They really seriously want more, which, by the way, is one of the marks, I believe, of a real believer. They want to know more. They want to go past the fluff, right? And so many churches and devotionals and movies and things, you get fluff. It's just throw all this beautiful, wonderful, flowery stuff at you. And man, that's all cool. But when it starts to go a little deeper, nobody's going to show up for that. Not nobody, but not as many. It starts to really separate out the Sunday morning. Hey, I just want to go in there for a good time and just leave me alone the rest of the week. Many fake Christians, I would say, just because they're just in it for the fun. It separates them from the real ones who say, I really want to know something more. Give me something more. Okay. Maybe that's what Jesus was doing. Yeah, you curious people, I'm going to kind of hide it from you because you're not interested. But those who are really interested, they're going to be the ones that do it. So anyway, this passage is not about total depravity. It's about God blinding temporarily the minds of people so he could accomplish an end. And by the way, I wonder, this is speculation, obviously, I wonder if some of these people who were around there when Jesus was saying this, I wonder if some of them were saved on the day of Pentecost. As he told these parables to hide the truth, it doesn't necessarily mean that they permanently were barred from understanding, but it may be that some of these people later on, God stopped blinding them because his purposes were accomplished, and maybe many of them became saved at the day of Pentecost also. So there we go. Not a Calvinist passage, just God working out his plan through the free will of man, which in this case, unfortunately, was rebellion, like it is so much. That's it for today. I hope I'll see you on the next one, and God bless.